Our story today takes place during the turn of the century. Not that turn of the century, but this last one that just happened, the 90s into the 2000s. And the amount of misogyny and discrimination in this story might just blow your socks off. But it is still a hopeful story and definitely worth telling. Just a few short weeks ago, I pulled this book off of my bookshelf. It's been patiently waiting for me to read it for about 6 years. And when I got about 30 pages in, I wanted to scream to the rooftops, and I decided that everybody needs to know this story. This is the story of a fearless warrior and her journey to becoming a combat pilot in the United States military and her fight for women's equality in combat. Welcome everyone to Sunflower Storytime with me, Kathleen, with our guest Stella, where we tell stories that celebrate the resiliency of the human spirit and leave us feeling hopeful and inspired. So gather around and scooch on in, and I will tell you about the incredible life of Mary Jennings Hegar, or MJ. The main source of today's story is MJ's memoir called Shoot Like a Girl, and an absolutely incredible book. Her author's note does state that the book was reviewed and okayed by the United States Department of Defense, and all necessary redactions were made. Her story has a lot of rough parts that may be difficult to hear. She goes into her accounts of domestic violence, sexual assault, and her missions flying in active combat zones. I will directly quote her own words on sensitive issues so that I don't add any embellishments or twist the story. I want you to hear her real account the way she wanted it to be known. So let's dive right in. MJ's first memory of life was at 4 years old, crouched with her knees pulled into her chest, head tucked in like a turtle retreating into its shell, as she watched her father push her mother through a glass door. Her older sister running after to help her mother, and then her father lifting her big sister by the throat off the ground. To this day, that moment of terror as a 4-year-old is the most scared she's ever been in her life. Combat missions dulled in comparison to being a helpless child surrounded by violence. This sort of violence was not unusual with her birth father and her mother. With an incredible amount of courage and bravery, her mother took her sister and her, packed them up, and moved them across the country to Texas to finish their childhood in peace. With time, MJ gained a stepfather who became the real father in her life, David. David was a Vietnam veteran with a son of his own. David treated his son and MJ the same, didn't encourage them to pursue different goals or have different ambitions in life. He never said that she was strong for a girl or brave for a girl, just that she was strong and brave to him. When she was a teenager and expressed interest in becoming a pilot, he said, "Sweet pea, if you want to do it, I'm sure you'll do it." Even though at the time women weren't really military pilots, he never discouraged her based on what women had already done or not done. When the time came to apply for Navy ROTC programs, she asked a high school teacher that was a Navy veteran for a letter of recommendation. This teacher was particularly passionate about serving his country and seemed enthusiastic to his students about serving. When she picked up the letter from him, he was acting a little shady, not looking her in the eye, quickly dismissing her, telling her that the envelope was sealed and to be given directly to the proper person. Well, she ended up opening up the letter and reading it. Her teacher had written that she lacked leadership ability, had no discipline or drive, and should not be considered. When she ran back to confront him, he said, "The Navy is no place for you, Mary. What are you trying to prove? This isn't a game. Defending our nation should be left to the strong, and it is no place for a woman." She called her Navy recruiter, who said that she was going to need to get used to this kind of pushback. There are going to be men and women along the way that will think that what you're doing is wrong and try their best to stop you. It was that day that she realized just how tough this path ahead was going to be. After that lovely experience, she decided to pursue the Air Force ROTC instead of the Navy. In the summer of '97, after her sophomore year, she went off to field training for officer candidates in Massachusetts. A few days into training, there was one of those big military obstacle courses that they all had to get through each obstacle one by one. She was killing it on the first 3 and jumped to the front of the line for the fun-looking next one when the instructor said that women were to sit this one out. Wow. Did our MJ listen to that? Nope. She became laser focused and jumped right in. And when she pulled herself up to the top of the last board, she sat on top and took in the view around her. Literally, like that scene in Mulan where she climbs the pole and she sits with all the men standing around her and cheering at her. All of her classmates were hooting and hollering, cheering for her. The next obstacle comes up, and she barges full steam ahead without realizing the instructors hadn't completely reset it yet, and smacked her knee against the log and was thrown onto the ground on her back, pain exploding into her knee and her back. This mistake would end up haunting her for years. The knee injury would have many years of pain ahead. She was carted away in an ambulance for emergency care. She cracked her kneecap all the way through. She was wheeled back to Texas with her mom and David. That next semester in October, David said that he was giving her her Christmas present early and very excitedly handed over a gift box to her. It was a cell phone. Doesn't sound like a big deal now, but in the late 90s, it was a huge deal. He opened up his arms for a big hug, but being a petulant teenager, she walked right past his open arms. MJ says that she never said I love you to David before. She was kind of building up to it and imagined it as this big grand gesture in the future, but she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud, how she felt. When she took the gift and walked around him into her room, he said, I love you, sweet pea. And she responded, yeah, I know, thanks. Then he headed out to work, and that was the last time she ever saw him. He died in a work accident that day. I'm heartbroken for her that she had to learn about such incredible loss so early in life. She dropped out of the semester to be home with her mom, but was just completely devastated. She felt like she wasn't a help to her mom. She was just frozen. Until she got a call from a friend saying that the nearby animal shelter had a white German shepherd that she had been on the hunt for years. She went right to the shelter, and the staff informed her not to go into the kennel because the dog was unlikely to be homed and would be put down. MJ went in to meet the dog, who barely appeared white because he was so dirty, and he was so scared he didn't bark and just cowered in the corner when she went in. She sat on the ground of his kennel and talked to him about her dad, all her feelings that she couldn't say out loud to anyone, and cried. He came over to her and sniffed her, then ate the food out of her hand. And when other dogs suddenly started barking, he jumped up and stood over her, like he was standing guard to protect her. That sealed the deal. She took him home and named him Jaeger, the German word for fighter pilot, hunger, and rifleman. The magic of the dog brought her back to life and gave her purpose to stand up and keep going. The following semester, she joined back into her classes, became a bit of a daredevil and adrenaline junkie, and commuted from home instead of living on campus. Time came for testing to be considered for pilot candidates. She ran the worst run on the PFT, physical fitness test, due to her injured knee. She was not chosen to become an Air Force pilot. She was devastated. It had been her dream since childhood to become a pilot. MJ took it as a setback. This just meant that she had to get to the dream of becoming a pilot using Plan B instead of Plan A. It would take a few extra years, but she knew she would make it. That's what ambition and determination are. Continuing the course and still giving it your all, even with an unexpected setback when things don't go as planned. When choosing what to do as a career instead of a pilot, she chose aircraft maintenance because she thought it would help her gain more knowledge and skill to help her be a pilot someday. Also of note, she fell in puppy love with a classmate named Jack, and they got married after she graduated. Her first assignment for the Air Force was in northern Japan as an aircraft mechanic. Her crew rotated about every 6 months, and she always felt like she had to prove herself to the new group. She watched new men come into a crew, and they were immediately trusted and respected, but she had to earn it from her peers. In her first meeting with her base major, Major Johnson, she followed the conduct code to a T, sitting pin straight outside of his office, came in when called, and issued a full salute as the sign of respect. He looked at her and said, "Lieutenant, the first time your time of the month gets in the way of doing your job, you're fired. Now, get out of my office." He never returned her salute, which means he didn't respect her enough to do it. She wasn't sure if this was just some sort of test or if he was just a misogynist. She came to find out that he was just a misogynist. I'd have to keep my head up, toughen up, and learn to get along with someone who clearly disrespected everything I was trying to accomplish. I feel strongly that your success in life has little to do with your situation and everything to do with your reaction to it. If she didn't see things this way, she would have never progressed as far as she did in her career. During this assignment, she was at the gun range to qualify to carry a service weapon. She had always left the range with an expert rating. This day, when she finished, the instructor gave her a high five and said, "Outstanding, Jennings! You shoot like a girl!" What? Was that an insult or a compliment? Because at the very least, it sounds like a backhanded compliment. But the instructor hurries to tell her that women are physiologically predisposed to being excellent marksmen. It's about their muscle tone, center of gravity, flexibility, heart rate, respiration, and, in my opinion, psychology. I try to teach my guys to shoot like a girl when I can. You know, the Soviets were extremely successful at using women as snipers in World War II. She went back home to research if he was right, if there were physical advantages to being a woman. She learned that he was right, and also that women in general handled G-forces better than most men, which would make women more adept at being pilots than men. There was a 6-month period where she was sent back stateside for training in a hiatus, and she made arrangements to obtain her private pilot's license to make her a more impressive candidate for the Air Force pilot program. After she finished and got her license, she returned to Japan for her second year. This time, her husband Jack would be joining her. He was on casual status, which meant that he was chosen to be a pilot but had not yet started training for it. This was the first time in their married life that they would be living together, and to keep it short, it was not going well. About 8 months in, she's in bed reading, and they get into an argument over Air Force regulations, of all things. And this is what she said happened. Then, like a bull about to charge, Jack leaned over me, clenching his fist, staring at me, as if daring me to speak again. Panic gripped me. He had lost his temper countless times before, but this seemed different. Slowly and without making eye contact, I slipped out of my bed. My intention was to pack a bag, not for the first time, and go stay with a girlfriend of mine who lived nearby. But as I slowly stepped by him, I suddenly found myself on the floor. It took me a minute to figure out how I had gotten there. Shocked, I looked up, realizing that he had kicked me in the back and sent me flying into a dresser. I'd bounced off the dresser and landed on my butt. I'll never forget that moment, looking up at him from the floor in utter shock. That was the moment she decided to divorce him. In the coming days, he begged her not to leave, but her mind was made up. She did do him one massive favor, though, and didn't tell anybody what had happened. They continued to be married, but did not sleep together or maintain a true relationship. Plan B for becoming a pilot was to apply for it, but each year, one person per base got the recommendation for it. That person had to have a stellar record, recommendations from the entire chain of command, and pass thorough medical exams. She got her application together and was in the process of gathering recommendations up when her own group commander in her interview with him said that he couldn't in good conscience recommend her. He asked her if her husband was on casual status. How would that work then, them both being pilots? Would you be home with the kids? What if you're both deployed at the same time? If he's going to be a pilot in the Air Force, then he's going to need a strong support system at home. Don't you want to be a good wife to him? He actually said that to a young woman applying to be a pilot, that her dream doesn't matter because she should be a wife and mother while her husband gets to live his dream. Now, thankfully, when she told another commander what had happened, he was livid and brought her into an even more superior's office and spelled it all out. Long story short, the first guy ended up giving her the recommendation. After all that, she didn't end up getting chosen because there was another person on base about to age out of candidacy, so that person was chosen instead. This is why I want to tell stories like this. The trailblazers who went through the process first had to climb over obstacle after obstacle and fight their peers and authority the entire way there. Being the first means getting berated constantly, even from authority. Now, she wasn't the very first, but she was in the early years of women becoming pilots. It's wild to hear what people said directly to her face and what their conceptions of women were. We can't forget what it took to get here and what women before us went through. In April of 2002, she had finished in Japan and was moved to Whiteman, Oklahoma. In a few months, it was time for her to start the pilot application process again. This next part is going to be tough to hear. It's also going to be tough to say out loud at all. If you're sensitive to accounts of sexual assault, I recommend you skip ahead. In her past physicals, it was deemed acceptable for her own gynecologist to perform any physical examination of and sign off on her gynecology health status. This particular flight doctor, Dr. Adams, who was performing the rest of her physical, did not find this acceptable. Here are her exact words on what happened. Dr. Adams, one of the many flight docs on the base, was in charge of my flight physical that year. He conducted a thorough exam, much more thorough than I was used to, as his attempts to ensure that I didn't have any tumors led him to groping my breasts far more attentively than seemed absolutely necessary. "Okay, put your feet in the stirrups," he commanded. "What? No, you don't understand," I protested. "I just had an exam. I gave the paperwork to the nurse at the front for your review." "No, you don't understand," he said angrily. "You're not in charge here. You don't get to decide how this goes. I won't sign off on a physical that I don't conduct myself. And if you want to be a pilot, you'll put your feet in those stirrups now." I could feel the color drain from out of my cheeks, and I felt like I was about to throw up. He was a general flight doc, not a gynecologist. I tried to explain to him that my husband was the only man who had ever seen me naked, and that I had only ever had female gynecologists, and that I didn't think that this was necessary. "Please, sir, can't you just use the exam I had last week?" He looked at me like I had just slapped him. Then his God complex kicked in. "No, but what I can do is fail you for psychological reasons," he barked. "You don't have the mental toughness you need to be a pilot if you can't submit to a simple exam. If you don't get your feet in those stirrups in 5 seconds, you can kiss being a pilot goodbye." I lay back and put my feet in the stirrups and began to cry, involuntarily squeezing my knees together, dreading the exam. It was bad enough having a female doctor examine me, but a male? No man other than my husband has ever touched me there. I bit my lip and tried to tough it out. "He's a doctor. He knows what he's doing. He does this sort of thing all the time. It'll be over soon." Dr. Adams snapped his glove on. "I guess you're not going to like this," he said, chuckling. What followed was in no way a gynecological exam. I lay there crying so hard I couldn't even breathe as he aggressively and painfully conducted his exam, as if he were trying to embarrass me, to hurt me, to put me in my place, to assert his control. To this day, I can't explain the emotions of that horrible moment. As many times as I've gone over it in my head, he was a doctor and a superior, and he had complete control over my future. That day I learned that mental restraints can be as tight as physical ones. I couldn't believe this was happening to me, but I didn't feel like I could stop him. I was in shock. I just stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face, praying the torture would be over soon. Obviously, if I had known he would do this, I never would have allowed it, but now I felt powerless to stop it. It was without a doubt the worst few minutes of my life. When he was done, he pulled off his glove and walked out of the examination room with barely a backward glance. "Get dressed. We're done here," he snapped over his shoulder. I pulled on my clothes, still choking back sobs, petrified I had failed some sort of psychological test. I couldn't hide my tears as I walked out of the medical facility. While I was worried that I might have failed my flight physical, I was also fully aware that someone had just used his position of authority to sexually assault me. Would he still fail me? Had I cried too much? Was there anything I could do? Should I tell someone? I was in shock. Just then, an airman ran up behind me, calling my name. I was in such a terror-stricken state that I flinched and put my arm up protectively. She froze and took a step back, her eyes wide. "Captain Jennings, the med group commander wants to see you in his office," she said quietly. "Can you follow me?" In a daze, I followed her to the full-bird colonel's office, not really caring about what he could possibly have to say to me, terrified I would bump into Dr. Adams again. Was the med group commander going to tell me I had failed my physical? that I had to submit to a psych eval? I was shaking and still crying as I tried to salute him. He stood and walked over to me, returning my salute. "Are you okay?" he asked me kindly, his brow furrowed, concern written all over his face. "Here, have a seat." "I'm fine," I said, wondering why he was concerned, how I came to be sitting here when this terrible thing had just happened to me. I was nowhere near ready to talk about it, certainly not to him. "Well, you don't seem fine," he just shook his head. "I just talked to Dr. Adams. He came straight from his appointment with you to tell me what he'd done. Do you want to press charges?" My head started spinning. The doctor had already admitted what he did. I had just left the examination room 5 minutes earlier, and the things were happening so quickly. Before I even had a chance to answer him, my own group commander walked through the door. My commander sat down with us, and the three of us discussed my options. I was so embarrassed to be discussing this with two old men I barely knew. I could press charges if I wanted to, but if I didn't, they'd be sure to handle it. I began crying harder. Then I listened in disgust as I uttered lines that seemed to come straight out of a made-for-TV movie. "If I press charges, would I have to see him?" I sobbed. "Would I have to tell a room full of people what happened?" I was shaking, horrified with myself for being so weak and not standing up for myself more. But still I said no, that I didn't want to press charges. If they promised not to let him ever do it again and they would punish him in their way, I'd leave it in their hands. I trusted them. "I think that would be best. And don't worry, he's not failing your physical," my group commander reassured me. I admit I was relieved to hear this. Instead of being utterly furious and ready to fight this monster to end his career, part of me was just relieved that I'd passed my physical and I could still move forward with my dream to become a pilot. I simply wanted to forget absolutely everything that had just happened. This man assaulted her, then reported it himself, admitted to everything that he did to his superior. Dear listener, what do you wish would have happened after an event like this? What course of action could bring a semblance of justice to MJ? After all, he told on himself. This wasn't her seeking out authority reporting him just on her word alone. If you guessed that nothing happened to him and he was nominated for Medical Group Company Great Officer of the Year award a few weeks later, then you would be right. It appears, based on what's written in her book, that there was no recourse or penalty or anything for assaulting a subordinate. He held her lifelong dream in his hand and said, "If you don't do what I say, I will crush it." That's coercion and abuse of power. She resigned from the U.S. Air Force shortly after. In the last few weeks of her time in the Air Force, she was sending out applications with various Air National Guard units around the country. She also began the divorce proceedings with her husband that she was still technically married to, but hasn't been on the same continent on in almost a year. When she called to give him a heads up, he actually sounded surprised that she was going to go through with the divorce and said to her, "But I haven't hit you in over a year." Direct quote. He actually said that to her. Like that was going to change everything. Sound logic, bro. So, March 2004, she gets an offer from New York Air National Guard to fly Combat Search and Rescue, CSAR. She packs up her car and moves to New York. On her drive, she came across a big interstate crossing and saw the sign saying, "Take a right to New York and take a left to go to Los Angeles." She said this was the first time she felt free and like she had control over her life. No oppressive husband, no military regulations, and chose the right to go to New York. "I would be in control of my life from here on out. I had enough of doing things just because I was expected to. I would never again let someone treat me like dirt. I would never again let someone convince me he could do whatever he wanted to do to my body against my will. I was truly free." She lived and worked a local job on Long Island, New York, until pilot training started in Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi. While she was in New York, her mom called and told her that Yeager had died suddenly. Poor thing. In the first days of flight school, her instructor called her, only one of two women in the class, up to the front while he was teaching about survival training. He asked her to put her hand in a cup, and inside of it was a worm. She shrieked when it wrapped itself around her finger and dropped it. The class laughed at her, and the instructor said something about American food aversions. Well, this would not do. She picked it up and threw it right down her throat like a shot of whiskey. The class laughed again and cheered her on. The instructor then mentioned it's a good lesson not to judge a book by its cover. Sometimes the biggest asset doesn't look like Superman. The first phase of flight training was in the T-37 Tweet, an ejection seat aircraft. During a difficult spin training with her and her instructor, she pulls out of a purposeful free fall spin, gains control, and stabilizes the aircraft. "Wow," he boomed into my headset. "That was the best spin recovery I've ever seen." My smile stretched. From a chick. Damn. This is a constant refrain from her. "Oh, you're pretty good. For a girl." Which is so backhanded. Her stepdad didn't do this to her, but all the other grown men she encountered in her life and career did. By the end of the first phase of training, her knees were both not doing well. She kept pushing it by running every night, but that made things worse. She had to get surgery after the first phase completed prior to the next phase in Alabama. Here they flew the UH-1 Huey. The exact aircraft they used had been patched up after flying in Vietnam. She said there were obvious bullet holes in them, which was a sobering reminder of what they were training to do. There was one notable incident during this phase of her training. She had already been appointed their class leader and was more advanced in years in training than her classmates. One day with the civilian instructor, she pushed the instructor a little too hard, insisting that she knew what was right and essentially disrespecting him in front of the whole class. I really appreciate when people are so vulnerable and honest in their memoirs, because moments like this are so human and relatable when you're just young and you feel like you know everything. She pretty quickly felt the embarrassment around what she did, and she wrote a letter explaining her apology for disrespecting him and really took accountability for what she did, promised to never do something like that again. Later in the day, after she gave it to the instructor, she was pulled aside after class by a very irate commander who said that letter saved her from being kicked out. He was furious at her conduct, but her complete accountability and acknowledgement made them give her one more chance, but made it very clear that it was her last chance. So don't mess up or you're out. There was another flight instructor, Captain Jones, who kept failing her flights due to things like judgment and situational awareness, and gave her no notes on how to improve or fix it. She met with a director of operations to address it and get some sort of feedback so she didn't fail the training. He pulled Captain Jones in for a joint meeting with all three of them. Captain Jones didn't like me, he said. His religion didn't believe in divorce, and he thought I should be taking care of my husband instead of being here. He also didn't think women should be flying. I stood there in shock, not just at what he was saying, but at the fact that he felt safe saying so in front of the DO. He was never admonished. A flight instructor was going to fail her because he didn't agree with her for personal matters. Nothing to do with her flight abilities. He didn't think women should fly and tried to stop it, even though the entire chain of command said women were definitely allowed to do it. It's ridiculous. In January 2006, she got her wings. She would have gotten the top stick, but Captain Jones had failed her those times, so she missed that honor due to one misogynistic guy. She did get the top honor for academics, though. She blew Captain Jones a kiss as she walked out of the hangar after the ceremony. The next step was survival training in Washington State. MJ doesn't talk too much about SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, escape training, because she doesn't want to give it away. The experience needs to be lived with no advanced knowledge. You get out of it what you learn going through it. But here's her big takeaways from what she learned through it. As a leader, you don't have to make all the decisions. You delegate to the right people with the right knowledge and expertise to make each decision. Let people make some missteps. It'll help them learn themselves and become stronger. Don't interfere. Set your ego aside and do what's best for the group. She didn't always need to be proving herself. There's no shame in accepting help. We're all in this together. She learned that last bit the hard way when she completely destabilized her knee again and had to be evacuated out. She would go back to redo Sear after she recovered. She did it twice. She credits Sear with giving her the ability to keep calm and what got her out of some pretty bad spots while flying combat later on. Now it was time to learn to fly her exact aircraft, the HH-60G Pavehawk, I think. They learned about flying in combat conditions, flight patterns on how to get your survivor but keep the aircraft positioned so that the gunner is trained on the enemy between the victim and the bad guy. When piloting an aircraft, there's a ton of multitasking happening, many different things to be paying attention to, managing at one time, the voices in the aircraft and through the radio in your helmet, all saying things at the same time. And it turns out that women have been proven to handle multitasking better than men. So in this male-dominated world, she had an advantage and took it. In January of 2007, it was time to get called to deploy in Afghanistan. After the notice, she was told to sit this one out because she was a new pilot, but she wasn't going to accept that. She was 31 years old, had experience deploying before, and through everything knew how to stay calm and was a great pilot. Her command agreed and decided to take her anyway. When she called her mom, she said, "I wish David were here to share the news. He'd have been so proud of you, MJ." She imagined him playing fetch with Yeager and could hear his voice telling her to knock him dead, sweet pea. Now we're in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Her crew worked 12-hour shifts on at a time. She flew out medics and PJs, pararescue, men to pick up the wounded. They would fly out with a sister ship in case one was shot down. They could still complete the mission. The aircraft commander in flight lead craft would lead, the co-pilot navigates. They avoided lines of communication, things like roads and rivers, to minimize enemy exposure and position sightings. The missions took about 30 minutes to an hour. The aircraft drops low and lands, PJs jump out, and the aircraft takes back off so that on the ground they can hear and not be drowned out by a helicopter. They come back down when they received word from the PJs that they're ready. After dropping the patient off at the Kandahar hospital, they would refuel and debrief until they got called back out again. The first call she flew came in as she was stepping out of the shower, hair dripping wet as she dressed and ran to the helo. When they were approaching their destination, they hear a call from the medic that they were requesting blood, which was a bad sign. That meant that their guy was deteriorating fast. It was too late to turn around and get blood, so they just kept going to get him. They broke protocol and flew directly back to the hospital, leaving their sister ship behind, a straight shot back. Their patient lost a pulse, and then they were doing CPR on him during the flight. They got him back. They lost the pulse again. He did make it to surgery, but he did not make it out of the surgery. She went to the OR after, and a nurse told her that he died. His aorta was nicked, so there was nothing that they could have done to change the outcome. Even if she flew a few minutes faster, he still would have passed. The sun was setting, and for the first time, I questioned whether or not I could really do this job. Somewhere in the U.S., an 8-year-old little girl had just lost her 28-year-old hero of a father. Her life would never be the same, and she didn't even know it yet. I grew up as a pilot that day. I would never wish for a mission again. Another day, they get called to a known hostile town to retrieve a 3-year-old boy who got severe burns from a fertilizer bomb his dad was making. They flew in with 2 Apache helicopters for protection. Those are assault aircrafts, not rescue ones like hers. After they got the boy and his father into the aircraft, her medic pulled a small stuffed bear out of his vest and showed it to the boy, who became very excited and had some distraction from the pain during the flight. She went back to check on his progress over the next 2 days, and by day 3 she found his bed empty. She assumed that he got better and was discharged. But a nurse that recognized her told her that he passed overnight, that the smoke inhalation damage was too great on his little lungs. MJ still cries for that boy to this day. She did a TED Talk that tells this story in more detail. I'll link it below because it's really great to hear from her. Her crew was great, except for one guy, Richard. who directly told her to her face that women can't hold their own in an evasion scenario, and he didn't want her there. Her response was to challenge him to a push-up competition, a tactic she used many times during her career and usually worked because she would win. It was never the strong, fit guys who were threatened enough by me to infer that I was physically inferior. It was always the guys who were at the bottom rung of the physical fitness ladder. It was as if, like any bully, they were so insecure that they had to seek out someone they thought was weaker than that they were and kick them around. Another thing I'd learned over my years of training, demanding respect did nothing. I would have to earn it. Well, Richard didn't take well to her response. He didn't engage with the push-up competition. He just walked away. But sometime later, she was at her locker and found an ammo mag missing. From the doorway, he said, "Lose something?" She would have been in major trouble for losing ammo, but she was saved by a friend that was in the army who said, "No problem, I have a spare," and he gave it to her. Richard went to their commander, who confronts her about the assigned equipment that's lost, and she shows that no, she has her magazine. Richard got so mad, he stormed off. It seemed that her commander could tell what really transpired and told her that she was doing a great job. Richard then starts a rumor that she had lost her mag out by the fence while on her knees. There was really no way for her to come out unscathed from dealing with a man like that. Eventually, a new crew from California came and was based out of the Talk next to hers. She grew close with them and felt much more at home with them compared to her New York crew. When her tour ended, she volunteered to serve a second consecutive tour since a pilot on her replacement team's wife was about to have a baby, so she stayed and was with the new crew from New York, but she got to spend more time with her Cali friends. When she completed her second tour, she got a call from one of her California buddies who said that they have an opening in the Air National Guard 129th Squadron. They had sent a pilot to New York earlier in the year, so it would be a fair swap. She jumped on it and joined the Team Hawk Counter-Drug Task Force. Her first day there, a friend pulled her aside and said that they were all thrilled to have her here, except for one guy, Doug, who was going to be an uphill battle. She was used to that by now. They did a lot of weed-pulling missions and fought wildfires. They spray-painted their aircrafts bright pink so that they were more visible through the smoke. They flew as low as they could, but even from inside, they could still feel the heat from the massive flames. She compared it to being the marshmallow being roasted over a campfire. She would feel the back of her neck burning like it was sunburnt. There was one day that they must have been flying over a weed farm that was burning because her crew grew increasingly more giggly, and they all went to a diner after and ordered absolutely everything they could, laughing the whole time. And they even called their commander, who asked if they were high. Thankfully, their commander didn't follow through on his threat to drug test them the next day. In spring 2009, it was her time to go back to Afghanistan. This time, she felt scared. She had grown so close to her crew in California and cared about them. She didn't want anything to happen to them. They named themselves with the call sign of Pedro, which was a nod to the call sign used in Vietnam by rescue helicopters. Their mission statement was, "These things we do that others may live." They gained a reputation as being the rescue crew that took on any danger, any assignment to save others. They grew close to a group of Danes that tour. There's a brief story that I want to read to you directly. The Danish Special Forces unit we were supporting had been kicking ass for about 10 months until the summer of 2009. In June of that year, they were in the middle of one hell of a firefight and were taking some heavy casualties. Seeing their brothers take so many injuries had the unit pretty shaken up, but inspiration soon came from above. Matt and Doug, along with their sister ship carrying a crew from Kadena, Japan, went in guns a-blazing and pulled out their wounded. Knowing that they weren't in this battle alone, reinvigorated the Danes to such an extent that it turned the tide of the battle and helped them overcome the insurgents they were fighting. On their way out, a Danish commander grabbed the ground controller's radio and keyed the mic with a message. "Pedros, you have given my Vikings brave inspirations today. Thank you." It was just about the coolest thing we had ever heard. A few days later, one of the men who had been in the battle sent us a poem he had written about that portion of the fight. It translates as, "The angels who came from above, even when the smoke from their rifles had not yet stopped, they took our wounded Viking and brought him to Valhalla. Now stand by our side again, you angel, we owe everything." Now we're going to go from that beautiful sentiment and head back to Kandahar, where MJ gets a surprise visit from her new colonel. It was former Major Johnson from Japan, now Colonel Johnson. He marches up to her next to her aircraft with a posse of people he was putting on some tour for, and you know what he says to her? "Lieutenant Jennings always wanted to be a pilot, but you guys know how unlikely it is to get picked up off of active duty for a slot. I always knew she could do it, but I had to be really hard on her to toughen her up first." He looked back at me with a creepy smile that I had never seen before. She owes it all to me. Colonel Johnson definitely gave me a lot of motivation to go to pilot training and prove to myself that he had been wrong about me. He was the guy who told her that if her period became a problem, he would fire her. And now she's a successful combat pilot, and he's taking full credit for it. I hate it. But okay. It's time to be serious, because the next story is big. July 29th, 2009. She's in the left pilot seat as they take off to rescue 3 critical American soldiers whose convoy had been hit by an IED ambush. 3 PJs climb aboard. She recognized one she'd flown with before, whose name was redacted. They are Pedro 15. They are the lead helicopter. Their sister ship was Pedro 16. 2 Army OH-58 or Kiowa Warrior helicopters were supporting the bombed convoy and were going to be in the area too. During the flight, their communications started malfunctioning. They weren't being received by the ground or their sister ship. They ended up landing, and 2 of the 3 PJs got out. She hears a crack like a baseball bat, and the windshield in front of her is shattered. She felt something warm on her arm, but ignored it. It was when her crew started shouting at her that she looked down and saw blood on her arm and her leg of her flight suit. She wasn't sure what happened immediately, but realized that she had been shot in the leg and there was shrapnel in her arm. She was more worried about having to patch her flight suit at that moment than she was that she had just been shot. Let's take a moment to think about how high her alertness was. As is the case with all people in combat conditions, for her to not notice the pain of being shot. That state of hyper-awareness and stress is so powerful that she didn't feel it. It helps us understand the state of their bodies and their minds when they return home after deployments, that these conditions must be really hard to shake and recover from. But back to the story. Her co-pilot immediately gets on the radio to say that their pilot was hit and were returning to base, and she said, No, I think I'm fine. I can continue the mission. She didn't want to be the reason that those injured soldiers didn't reach medical attention in time. So they continued with the mission. The PJ calls that he's ready for pickup. The other PJ got separated and wasn't with him, and they were hoping that once he heard the helicopter land that he would come back and they would both get on board. Their sister ship radios that they have a bent gun. One side of the aircraft couldn't fire to protect them, and that they couldn't switch places and land to grab the injured because they were too heavy. There was some debate over how truthful that last part was, but in real time that there was nothing they could do about it. So Pedro 15 had 2 options. Either land in the same spot as they did before, where people had seen them land and taken a shot at them, but at least they knew that there was no IED at that spot. Option 2 was to take the chance of landing in a different spot and possibly hitting an IED like the original convoy did. No good options. They decide that they're going to land in the same spot, which turned out to be not a great decision because at this point they had a machine gun trained on the same spot that they landed in before. It started unloading on them as they descended. but they were able to load up their injured under the heavy fire. After they took off, they realized that the second PJ had been left behind, but there was no turning back at this point because this helo had only one landing left in its life. Her buddy in the back tells her that there's fuel leaking back here directly into the cabin. She looks down at her tanks and one fuel tank is empty. They had shot the fuel line and the second tank was draining fast. They had to land very soon or crash. Her co-pilot found a rocky spot. It's harder to place IEDs under rock as opposed to sand, so they chose it. They touched down very hard, and now they're stranded in enemy territory. Their sister ship would still not land to pick them up, and that's when they started taking enemy fire again. They hear on the radio that one of the Kiowas needed to return to base, but they could land and carry two of them out on their skid, and that the sister ship could then pick up the injured and the PJs. On their skids, like in a movie, even they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Well, that was now the plan. And the Kiowa coming down to pick up a few gave the sister ship enough courage, I guess, to come down and retrieve the rest. MJ wanted to put up a big fight at the idea of being evacuated first. She wanted to be the last one out to make sure everyone was safe. But the PJ was tactical lead on the ground, and she had to follow his orders. When they're in the air, it's kind of the opposite. So she climbed on the side of a helicopter and was flown out. Once they were airborne, she was at a machine gun on the side of it, or rocket launcher, whatever it is, and she saw a muzzle flash, which was the proof of the enemy's position or point of origin. Without that proof, they aren't allowed to just randomly shoot at stuff. So she saw the flash and she started shooting at the site. Who knows if she actually hit anything, but kind of exciting. When they land back at base, she beelines for the talk to find out what happened to her crew. She had to know if they made it out. Some medic was trying to stop her because she had been shot, and he was trying to treat her and do a full assessment before she did anything else. She's dressed in her full flight suit, gear, helmet, and everything, and he begs her, "Sir, please let me treat you." And that's when she realized that he doesn't realize that she's a woman. But she also realized that there was no way she was going to get past him without letting him do what he wanted to do. So, in an exasperated move, she pulls down her pants so her bare legs and underwear are in full view of the hangar. Her Hello Kitty undies, of all things. She did eventually get the good news that the full crew and wounded made it out of the stranded helo, and they all returned to base safely. The call sign Pedro was used by every crew following hers when they left, leaving a legacy behind them. And that was her final deployment. When she returned to Austin, she did go back and forth to California for a few months. One night in Austin, when she was meeting a bunch of old high school friends at a local bar, she got reacquainted with a mutual friend from high school named Brandon. And from that night on, the two were inseparable. They were engaged in a matter of months, and she gained 3 wonderful stepchildren who she also fell in love with. Her knee eventually led to her being grounded and put an end to her pilot career. She could have fought it harder and stayed longer, but she decided it wasn't worth the fight to eventually end up destroying her knee and back permanently. Within a few years of leaving, she got a call from the ACLU. They asked her to join in a lawsuit against the Secretary of Defense to allow women in combat roles. She immediately jumped on it. Days before getting the call, her stepdaughter, a mere preteen at the time, excitedly told her that she wanted to be a Marine when she grew up. MJ was thrilled at the idea and encouraged her. But when her stepdaughter came back to her a few days later crying, she said, "Why didn't you tell me that my dream was impossible? Women aren't Marines, they aren't soldiers." Another adult in her life had told her that. This conversation happened with her stepdaughter the night before she got the call from the ACLU, so she was primed and ready to start advocating for women in the military and combat. The lawsuit sought to overturn the ground combat exclusion policy that was put in place in 1994 in response to the lifted ban on women in combat cockpits. That move, so many years ago, had been met with doomsday predictions of overly emotional women ruining the Air Force with their periods, babies, and breast milk. But of course, had long since been validated as the right thing to do. Women have been awarded medals and given command positions. They've shown resilience as prisoners of war, served as instructors, and done everything their male counterparts do without the predicted downfall of the American way of life. Furthermore, at the more basic level, one of the things that distinguishes us from military dictatorships is that civilians have always been the ones telling the military what to do. It's one of the core elements of our history and Constitution. Women are needed on the front lines for a variety of reasons. Either they are the best person for that particular job, say the unit's top marksman, or they have to do a job that only a woman could do. For example, patting down a female attendees at the fragile council meetings with local warlords. Whatever the reason, women were needed on the front lines, and commanders were constantly having to tap dance to get them out there. It was designed to untie the hands of the commanders in order to allow them to select and train the best teams for the job at hand without regard to gender. They won the suit, and Secretary Panetta overturned the policy on January 13th, 2013. MJ helped found an organization called Combat Integration Initiative based out of D.C. She organized a Storm the Hill Day where they met with as many members of Congress as they could. They introduced many talking points that those politicians ended up using during media interviews on the subject. She received many awards throughout her career and many military ribbons, but most notably, she earned the Purple Heart in 2009 and the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor in 2011. And most recently, she ran for Congress in the 31st District of Texas in 2018, but lost. Then she ran for Texas Senate in 2020. You may have seen her viral campaign video, Doors, which I will link to. I really hope we haven't seen the end of MJ's political career or just her career in general. I was blown away at her memoir. She is endlessly strong and resilient and broke down barrier after barrier, then paved the way for all women after her to have more opportunities. So, let me know what you think about this extraordinary woman and her story. Please, please, please go read or audiobook her memoir. It's eye-opening and makes you feel 1,000 different emotions, and it reads really well. So, thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again soon. Bye. No, is that it?